So Euclid's method for finding the greatest common factor of two numbers is a special kind of repeated division. And let's pick an example we did earlier, like playing with 12 and 16. So the first step is to just divide the smaller number into the larger number. So 16 divided by 12 is equals, so 12 goes into 16 once, and then I want to keep track of the remainder. So there's a remainder of 4. So then what I do is I take the 12 and I move that up, and I take the remainder and I move that over. And then 4 goes into 12 3 times with a remainder of 0. And once you hit a remainder of 0, that means the previous remainder is the greatest common factor. So once I get that 0, then the previous remainder is the greatest common factor. Right? And we already know that 4 is the greatest common factor. We did that one earlier. Now, sometimes it takes a bunch of steps for this to work, and there are different ways to write it out. Sometimes people write this out as a multiplication problem. Sometimes they write it out as a division problem. So for example, the alternative way to write that is I could say 16 is equal to 12 times 1 plus 4, and then I just shift again. I move the 12 over here, and I say 12 is equal to 4 times what? And then plus 0. And again, once I get that 0, I look back at the previous. So there's the multiplication way to talk about this method, or there's the division way. So let's try it for another set of numbers that we played around with earlier, like 84 and 96. So greatest common factor, 84 and 96. And sometimes you need a calculator to do this. Sometimes you can get by without. So the first thing I want to do is find out how many times 84 goes into 96. I'm going to use the multiplication version. So I'm going to write 96 equals 84 times what? Well, I can pretty clearly see it's 84 times 1, and then the remainder is going to be 12. And then I shift the 84 into this position, and then I look at the 12. 12 times what is 84, and I remember, well, 12 times 7. And turns out that there's no remainder that time. So that means 12 has to be the greatest common factor of those two numbers. All right, so now I'm just going to randomly pick a couple of numbers, and I might need a calculator for this. Give it a try. Let's suppose we try to find the greatest common factor of, how about 124 and 220. So the first thing I do is I start with the bigger number, the 220, and you could state the multiplication version or the division version, whichever makes you happy. Use the multiplication one today. So I want to know how many times does 124 go into 220, and I want to know what the remainder is here. So if I double 124, that's going to be 248. So that double is too much, so it's got to be 1 time. 1 times 24 goes into 220, but not 2 times. And then I want to know what the difference is. So the difference there, I think, is going to be 96. But a calculator isn't a bad thing to whip out here. So I'll show you a couple of ways to look at that on a calculator. So I'm taking that 220 and dividing by 124. And I can see it goes in 1 time, and then there's that decimal part that's related to the remainder. Now, this calculator is nice. It gives me a fraction mode, but it's not a mixed number, so I can't see the actual remainder, but I can see, and you can't really see it there, so just use the decimal mode. All right, so it's that fractional part that I want there. So what I want to do is just get rid of the 1 and see what that fraction is. So I want to take that previous answer and get rid of that whole number part, the 1. Now I got that decimal by dividing by 124. So if I just multiply that decimal by 124, then I'll get rid of the decimal. So I want to take that previous answer times the divisor I picked, which was 124, and that'll give me the remainder of 96. So we just take off the whole number part, multiply the divisor by the decimal. That tells me the remainder as a whole number. And then we just shift numbers. So now 124 is the number I want to look at. And I want to know how many times 96 goes into it. And I can see if I double 96, that's too much. So it goes in once. And then the difference in those two is the remainder. So that's what, 24 plus 4, which is 28, is the remainder there. And then we shift again. 96 moves there. We want to see how many times 28 goes into it, and then figure out what the remainder is. So this one, I'm going to go to the calculator. It looks like it's going to be at least 3 times, maybe 4. So now I have 96 divided by 28. Make sure I have my right numbers. Yep. And I can see it goes in there 3 whole times. So then what I do is I get rid of the 3. So I take my previous answer, get rid of the 3 to isolate the decimal, and then take that decimal times the divisor 28. And that'll give me the remainder of 12. And I really don't even need the quotient here. I just need the remainder, but I'm going to keep track of it anyway. So next we shift the 28 over, and we want to know how many times 12 goes into 28. And I know 12 times 2 is 24, which is as close as I can get. And there's going to be a remainder of 4. Shift the 12 over. And how many times does 4 go into 12? 4 goes in there 3 times, and there is no remainder. So once we hit that 0, then the last remainder has to be the greatest common factor. So sometimes we get lucky, it happens in 2 steps. Other times it takes more than 2 steps, and it just varies from problem to problem. But it's another way to go about finding greatest common factor. This is called Euclid's method. And then if somebody said, I want the lowest common multiple, remember we have that other trick where I can just take the 2 original numbers and multiply them and then divide by their GCF, and that will be the LCM. So we have lots of techniques to use.